No matter what your current fitness level is, you can do stuff today to improve your overall capacity, improve your overall stamina and strength, and just get better in the gym to allow you to move better in life. And today, we're gonna go over the 7 principles of fitness and basically describe how you can apply them to your own life to get the most out of your time in the gym and to just live the most fulfilling, longevity filled life. I know you guys are all excited for this as I am, so stay tuned until the end so you can honestly just revamp your entire look on fitness. By understanding these 7 principles, you will really have an upper edge on everyone else who is getting into fitness, because just knowing these things can get you a really long way in improving your fitness, in improving your health. And it's not something that's often talked about. These concepts are very simple, and especially to understand, very simple. And when we apply them to our training routine, as you'll see very shortly, you will seriously, regardless of whatever physical capability you currently have in life, be able to improve it greatly. So when we're talking about how to actually become the fittest version of ourselves, we break these down into 7 buckets or 7 different tiers. So basically, we're trying to apply all 7 of these principles of fitness, or at least understand these principles of fitness to become the fittest version of ourselves. So individuality is the first one, and we're going to go into these a lot more in depth later in the podcast, but just a brief introduction. Individuality is basically saying that no 2 people will respond the same to a given training program. Not everyone's the same, right? Specificity, this simply being is that to get better at a certain task, we need to do that specific and certain task very specifically or very exact. In addition to this, we also need progression in our fitness program. And progression simply being is that we need to do more work over time. So this is kind of the time aspect of we need to do more stuff over time. That's a really big, crucial component to consider. Overload kind of goes in the same horizon as progression. We need to overload, or we need to apply more stress to the body. And usually this kind of is in conjunction with progression, but we need to overload. We need to stress or push ourselves in our training program, of course, to get better. And of course, if we're stressing ourselves out, we don't want to just stress ourselves and run ourselves into the ground. So the way we actually kind of counteract this is through recovery. And recovery is a super crucial component that a lot of people neglect in their training program. And later in the podcast, we will definitely dive in and how to tackle recovery to the best of your abilities. And then, of course, once you recover, there's an awesome thing. This is what we all want in a fitness program, and ultimately how we become the fittest version of ourselves. We adapt. The adaptation occurs. After we place that stress, after we recover, we adapt and we get better and we get fitter. But it doesn't end there, because there's reversibility. This idea that if you don't continually work your muscle, do this training program, you will not actually get better. So that's a brief example of the 7 principles and how you can become the fittest version of yourself. But we need to go a little bit more in depth on these. So the first thing we're going to talk about is this idea of individuality in fitness. So what is individuality in fitness? So this idea of individuality simply states that no 2 people will respond to the same training program as another. So a great example of this is if we look at a professional athlete. A professional athlete is going to have a training program that is very catered to their specific professional goals. Likely, the volume and intensity is going to be incredibly high for them. Some of the exercises might be a little different than what you would normally see on a training program for somebody who is just starting out. So compared to a recreational program, right? Somebody just starting out, their training program is likely going to have less complex movements. They might not be doing as much training volume. So there's two different training programs, but specifically, these training programs will not affect those people the same way. That's exactly why we have different individualized programs. If I took the program from the professional athlete and then applied it to the recreational athlete, guess what would happen? He actually wouldn't get as much better compared to if he just did the recreational program. That recreational athlete might actually end up developing overtraining syndrome. They're probably going to be doing too much. They're probably going to predispose themselves to injury because we didn't use that individualized program for them. This is exactly why having a custom program, or at least as custom as you can get for your specific goals, is so crucial. So when you're asking, should the program look exactly the same for them? Of course, the answer is going to be no, because their goals are different. There's a lot of different other things to consider. Some of these may be age. I would never train somebody the same who is a very young athlete compared to a very older adult. I work with a lot of seniors. I also work with my little brother who's 13 years old. For him, I'm teaching him basic movements like squatting and deadlifting with load, with barbells. And although I might be doing similar movements with some of the seniors and older adults I work with, as in getting up out of a chair, that's kind of a squat, I might be practicing a basic hinge pattern. This would be kind of like a deadlift. So it's similar, but the program isn't exactly the same because it shouldn't be. They're not going to respond the same way. Of course, there are some sex differences, so usually females can tolerate volume a little bit better, simply because usually the weights that they are lifting isn't as heavy as most males. And this is just a generalization, of course. There are going to be some females that can lift as heavy as males, but that's going to be a part of individualized programs. So a female might be doing more volume because they can recover better, versus a male might be doing a little less volume but more intense workouts. So that's kind of just one thing. Also, of course, training history. As we talked about with the professional athlete versus a recreational athlete, you're not going to have a recreational lifter or somebody who's never worked out do that professional athletic program simply because they're not used to those movements. It's going to predispose them to injury. It's not a good idea to get them to be the fittest version of themselves. We need those custom programs, very specific. And also genetics too. This is probably one of the biggest things when it comes to training programs, is that some people, just because they're genetic gifts, when I played high school football, I envied these people. I always looked at them, I'm like, man, they're lifting more than me. They can run faster than me. We're doing the same exercises. We're doing the same program. Guess what? Some people, just the way their muscles develop, just the way their overall neurological system develops, their central nervous system, they can adapt better. They can handle stress better. And this is something you need to realize when you are trying to become the fittest version of yourself, that some people might be doing the same program as you, but simply genetically, they might be able to handle it better. And vice versa. You might be able to do a program super well and bring someone into the gym who's never lifted, and guess what? They might not be able to do it as well as you because maybe you're a genetic jackpot. Also too, goals and desires. So we need to have different programs because a lot of people's goals are different too. Somebody who has a goal of just managing pain in their body, we're going to have the program more catered towards that versus a professional athlete who wants to optimize movements, optimize performance. It's going to be largely catered towards that. And of course, if you think about it, if I take a program designed for pain management and give it to a professional athlete, it's probably not going to feel like he's doing anything. It's going to be like him going through a very low-key physical therapy routine. So just kind of a starter point, that's individualization in fitness. Go ahead and give this video a like if you are getting value from this so far. And in addition to that, we also need to talk about specificity. And specificity is something that often gets kind of put to the wayside in fitness. So this should hopefully be a good reminder for a lot of people. So specificity in fitness simply states that to get better at a specific task in fitness, and I'll give some examples in a second, to get better at a specific task in fitness, you must do that task as close to the task as possible. So let's give some sport examples. We can look at a pitcher in baseball. A pitcher, if he's trying to get the best pitching, right? Best pitching speed, best pitching power, best pitching mechanics, most of his training is going to be pitching. We wouldn't have that pitcher, for example, if we look at the sprinter in track, do a sprint workout. Why? It's working very different muscle groups. It's working very different motor patterns. So your central nervous system's ability to actually work on that specific thing is going to be different. We might have him do sprints at some point because maybe he'll be running the bases, but that's going to be a very small portion of his training because most of the time when he's in his given sport, he's going to be pitching. So that's kind of a big thing. And another good example is a hockey and goalie. Being a hockey, or specifically a goalie in hockey, you're going to need to have really good hip flexibility. You're going to need to be able to move laterally very, very quickly. Your overall cardio and stamina might not need to be as high as a normal hockey player, so you might not be doing as much sprinting, back and forth ice sprints as them. You might be doing a little bit more flexibility work. You might be getting a little more heat tolerance, right? Getting used to just having all that gear on you. If we look at this from examples in the gym, if you are somebody who's trying to improve their back squat, for example, you need to be doing the back squat mainly. And you might be doing other exercises in addition to this, some lunges, working that unilateral strength. But for the most part, you need to be very specific to your given goals. Now, despite this, there is some crossover between modalities. So if you take somebody who's running for a lot of their workouts, and then you take them to biking, maybe take them on a stationary bike, for example, you'll probably notice that cardiovascularly, or the ability to basically produce aerobic capacity, so the ability to do a long duration activity, like running, if you take them biking, they will be able to do that a little bit better than somebody who is completely detrained, simply because they have built that base of cardiovascular work. But they will not be as good as somebody who just does biking, because they're very specific to that exact goal, very specific to that movement. They're getting local muscular endurance built in their legs if somebody is doing cycling more. Versus if somebody's doing running more, they might get a little more ankle strength. They might get a little more hamstring strength. They're going to have to build a lot of strength around their knees to be able to handle all that pounding that happens from that. So similar exercises, similar in what they accomplish in getting us cardiovascularly fit, but the one who is the most specific to that actual thing in their training, the one who does it the most, is going to reap the biggest benefits. So just remember that if, let's use a 5K for example, a lot of people will have that as like a summer goal. The best way to train for a 5K is to run. Get good at running, right? We wouldn't have you train for a 5K by doing biking. in addition to running, we would have you mainly running. Now, with that said, it is good to kind of switch up your overall routines every now and again to limit overuse and injury. But understanding your goals and understanding that you need to be very intentional to these goals will allow you to reap the biggest benefits in your overall fitness program for yourself. So specificity is super, super huge and super, super important. But what is also important is this idea of overload. And overload is something that a lot of people probably have heard or understand at some point, but I think it kind of goes to the wayside. So to start off this discussion on overload, I want to pose a question for you. And that question simply being is, will a muscle become stronger if you lift the same weight? Or another way to look at this, will you become faster in your mile time if you just consistently every single day run the same mile? So if you're trying to run a 6-minute mile, but right now you can only do an 8-minute mile, if you just do an 8-minute mile every single day, will that ever get you closer to your 6-minute mile? No. Just like if you lift the same weight every single day, you will never get to that stronger weight. We need to overload. And this is simply being because your body has adapted to the demands you've put on it before. So more stress needs to be added to the body. And this can be done in a lot of different ways. So what I wanted to kind of introduce in this section is this idea of the FIT principle. So FIT is simply an acronym, and you can use this in your training program to kind of switch around different variables to make it more doable for yourself, make it more actionable, especially when you're in the gym and you're thinking on the fly, how can I make this a little bit more challenging? Because, as we just discussed, that challenge, that added stress is what gets you to be more fit in the long term. So the first part of fit is frequency. This simply being is how often you are training. So usually we look at this as a term of days per week. So if you're trying to become a fitter version of yourself and you are only lifting 3 days per week, a really simple way to do this is, of course, adding another day per week. But in addition to that, you can also think about your day-to-day frequency. So if you have a lot of time on your hands and you're trying to become the fittest version of yourself, you might consider doing 2 separate workouts. Bumping it up from one workout, maybe a 30-45 minute workout in the morning, to another 30 to 45 minute workout in the evening. Again, this isn't super practical for a lot of people, but you might be in a situation, maybe you're night shift or just have like a split shift job where you're just kind of working different areas. Also too, if you are finding value from this and learning something new, please consider giving the video a like. Greatly appreciate it. But that's frequency, and frequency can be played around with a lot depending on where you currently are at. We can also work on intensity. Now, intensity is something where people usually know what we're talking about, but when we're talking about intensity, it's basically when it comes to weightlifting or resistance training, how much force or how much load is being put on the body. So a really simple way to think about this is dumbbells. We might be lifting a 50-pound dumbbell one day. That 50-pound dumbbell is resistance and force. The intensity is basically that. It's 50 pounds. And that intensity, say we're doing a dumbbell row, for example, and we can actually lift a 100-pound dumbbell once. So that intensity of that 50-pound dumbbell for us is going to be 50% of what we can do one time. So the intensity is 50%. And intensity is something that you can play around with a lot when it comes to overloading your body. So if you're normally doing, let's use the dumbbell row for example, since we were just talking about that. You're doing 3 sets of 10 of a dumbbell row, and the intensity is 50%. A way you can become the fittest version of yourself and improve your overall fitness is by bumping that up maybe to 55% for 3 sets of 10. You have just overloaded the body, because when we do 55% or a 55-pound dumbbell, you are now putting additional stress on the body. And the stress isn't everything, as we'll discuss a little bit later. Stress is one portion of it. We need to recover and adapt and become stronger, but the stress is a good part. So that kind of gets you to that first session. So that's intensity. Intensity can also be kind of, when we're talking about cardiovascular endurance, how fast you are running a mile, or how fast you can bike an 800-meter sprint. The way you can look at that is obviously just doing it a little bit faster, so decreasing the overall amount of time, so your intensity. Usually this would actually be speed, so I kind of apologize, we'll talk about time in a second, but usually it would be kind of miles per hour, which is kind of the same line of thinking for that. So speaking of time, let's talk about time. So one of the ways you can overload your body is by changing the overall frequency of time in your workout. So maybe you normally do a 30-minute workout and you have all your exercises written down, ABC, and you can do 10 minutes in one exercise, 10 minutes in another, and then 10 minutes in the last one. A way you can overload that is by cutting down your overall workout by 25 minutes and trying to do the same amount of work in that same time frame, or a different time frame, 25 minutes, right? So you're gonna have to split that up a lot differently, and you're gonna have to jam a lot more volume in that given time. When we're thinking about cardiovascular work, as I just kind of described, if you run a 6-minute mile, a way to overload that would of course be, with the time aspect of this, would be a 5-minute 30 mile. So you can also look at this as rest intervals too. So if normally you're resting 30 seconds between weight sets, you can bring that down to 15 seconds. That's a very short amount of time, but you will greatly overload the body because you're basically not giving yourself as much time to recover. So through adaptation, through recovery, you will get better at being able to handle that very shorter rest period. And then of course, a way we can also overload this is by type, and this is just introducing different types of exercises. So if we are normally doing like a goblet squat where we're holding something to our chest and squatting up and down, maybe we can try a barbell back squat someday. Or maybe we are doing it to a very slow tempo or a slow cadence down. So those are a few different ways we can kind of mess with type. I also did want to kind of discuss this idea of overloading versus maxing out. So overloading is what we're trying to do. We're trying to do something usually sub-maximal because we want to build our max strength, our max capacity. But we can only do that with overloading work, which is usually sub-maximal. Maxing out is the max stress, and you won't actually get stronger by just simply maxing out every single day. As well as you could, I should say, if you were just overloading incrementally. It might happen very, very fast, but you're going to hit a peak and probably get injured. This is what happens with a lot of people who go in and just bench their heavy set every single day. It's very hard to manage that volume. Your tissues don't have a lot of time to tolerate with it. So we need light additional stress. And I do want to remind you that this light additional stretch, as in overloading just a little bit, is still stress. And once we overload that stress to our body or apply that stress to our body, this is where we become better. So overload is super, super crucial for you in your workout routine to become the fittest version of yourself. And kind of along those same lines is progression. Now, progression, the way I like to describe it is that it's kind of more of a time frame. So we need to overload, but we also need to overload over time. So it's similar to overload. but essentially we need to do more work over time. So some examples of this is building up to running a mile over 6 months, maybe a 6-minute mile. We could say building up to running a 6-minute mile over 6 months. And the way we would do that is through progression. So day one, we can't run a 6-minute mile, so we're gonna have to take a step back. But then once we get a little bit better, once we adapt after applying that overload and stress, we will then have to progress and go a little bit further and then apply more overload, apply more stress to the body. If we're looking at bench pressing, so maybe your goal is to bench press 225 after 1 year of practice. So initially, maybe you can only do the bar. So that's your starting point. Once you get strong at applying the stress of the bar to your body, you need something else. You need to progress and get a little bit further. So maybe you'll add a 25-pound plate on each side, right? You're gonna progress over time. This is something that takes a long time. Sprinting a 4-second 40-yard dash. That's another thing you can look at. Trying to do that in 3 years. That's a pretty fast 40-yard dash if you're not into fitness. But it's the same concept. So day one, maybe you can only run it in 6 seconds. And then once you get really good at running it in 6 seconds, you have to progress and try to do it in 5.5 seconds. And then over time, work through that. Additional overload over time is what leads to long-term fitness goals for yourself. So we progress through the use of overload, and this is kind of where the term progressive overload usually gets thrown around. They're very, very interchangeable, kind of hard to separate. So if you're saying progressive overload, it's basically kind of a redundant thing. But we need to progress through this use of overload. So lifting more, running longer. After you have recovered from your workout, from that overload we applied, then we need to progress. So the overload aspect of progressive overload is kind of the thing that happens. And then once that happens and we adapt, then we need to progress and get more. So kind of along those same lines, I wanted to hopefully suss out the difference between progression and overload. So what is the difference between progression and overload in fitness? And hopefully this kind of clears stuff up. Again, as we just discussed, it's kind of similar. They're very interchangeably used in modern day life. You'll hear progressive overload being thrown around a lot. So progression simply being, and the way I look at it, is you need to push more over time. So it's more of the time aspect of it. The reason you need to progress is because of overload. So the overload itself kind of stimulates something happening. It stimulates to your body, here's a stress. We need to recover and get better. Once you recover and get better, that leads to you needing to progress because your body's adapted to it. It's kind of toned out on what it can do. It needs more. So the overload aspect is that extra stress. Overloading leads to the need to progressing. So if we're talking about different ways to overload, frequency is one. So this could be how often you train per week. It could be how often you train per day. Intensity, that's going to be how hard you're working based off of a maximal workload. So if you're doing a squat with a weight, for example, it's going to be how much weight of your max load of squatting you're lifting. If you are running, it's probably going to be off speed. So if you can run 6 miles an hour, for example, at an intensity from that, say like about half the intensity, of course, would be a 3 mile per hour walk. It would be a walk at that point, right? Usually that's about the average speed. So intensity is usually like miles per hour or how fast you're going. Potentially watts too, that's kind of the energy you're producing from it. If you think about like how much energy it takes to put on a light bulb, that's usually done in watts. So that's intensity. And then time. Time is another way to overload. So basically, you know, if you are working out, you can add in a longer time to your workout. You can also cut it shorter. So if you're doing longer workouts, maybe you're going to be doing more things in it. But also too, you can cut it shorter and try to do the same amount of things too, because you'll need to recover quicker in between those sets, just as another way to overload the body. And then the type, maybe you're first starting out with maybe back squatting or just doing a dumbbell deadlift, which is a pretty simple movement to learn if you have the right help and the right tools. And you want to progress to a conventional deadlift, or maybe a clean, for example. Those are very complex movements, and understanding that those different ways to overload is kind of the type. So overloading happens, and once overloading happens, we need to recover. Once we recover, we have adapted, and once we have adapted, this will lead to the need to progress, the need for progression. So if that helped explain things for you, please give the video a like. I know it's kind of the same when we think about progressive overload, but those are the difference. Both very important and crucial to being the fittest version of yourself. But what happens after overload, and is also super important, is this idea of recovery. So we can't just run ourselves into the ground and just do a bunch of crazy workouts. We need to recover from it. So a question I want to pose you is, do you get fitter after working out? No, absolutely not. We only get fitter after we recover properly from the workout. And this is something where especially a lot of beginners, when they're first starting out, will run themselves into a huge hole, simply because they think that working out, they're gonna do their really hard workouts. I'm gonna go in for 2 to 3 hours and I'm gonna kill my muscles. And that's absolutely true. You probably did kill your muscles. I know a lot of people who are just starting out. One of my friends actually did. I'll give you this example in a second, but the only time you actually get stronger is when you recover from it. And when you recover, your body will adapt to it. So I'll give you a quick example. One of my friends in high school, he never worked out before and he was getting into the gym. And this is something I warned him. I'm like, dude, you're gonna have a lot of motivation, like pace yourself, basically. Pace yourself. And he went in, and the first week he lifted every single day. He did 30 minutes on the treadmill. He did sauna afterwards. He was eating healthy. And guess what happened? He burnt himself out. He did not recover from all that because his body didn't have time to ramp up to it and get used to it. So guess what? All that work he did was kind of wasted. And it was extremely unfortunate because he had very, very high motivation into being active and becoming healthier in life. But his mindset behind doing more on that given day is what's going to lead me to become the fittest version of myself, is ultimately what led to his demise. So we get fitter after we recover. Just remember that. Just remember that. So the workout is important, but without sleeping well, and we'll cover this in a second, and all those different recovery modalities, it doesn't matter. It's completely wasted. So let's talk about stress and homeostasis here. So normally when we work out, stress is placed on the body, and your homeostasis is disrupted. Your hormones are kind of going all over the place. There's damage to your muscle. Your body was basically just not able to withstand it, right? And your body's like, I need to repair this. I need to get better. So how am I going to do that? Well, the way we can do that is through recovery modalities. So these are things we know, like sleeping better. That's a huge one. Hydration is another big one. We need to stay hydrated and increase our overall water intake. Proper nutrition, so getting a good amount of protein. Healthy carbs, especially right after the workout, is very, very crucial. Managing your overall stress is another really big thing as well. A lot of times people are doing their workouts good, but outside the gym, they're highly stressed. They have a job that stresses them out. They're in a relationship that stresses them out, and they can't recover well. So basically all those things, all the good stuff that they were doing in the gym was completely wasted, which is really unfortunate. And this does happen with some people too. Another way we can actually recover too is through some light activity. So light activity could just be a simple walk, going down the street, maybe some light stretching. Again, it really doesn't matter, but doing these different things, and these are all crucial because remember, without recovery, you're not going to actually get better and improve your overall fitness level and become the fittest version of yourself, because that's ultimately what we want. We want to recover and get better. So without recovery, you will not get fitter. So don't neglect recovery, and especially sleep. Man, people just love neglecting sleep, but it's so crucial. And if you're trying to get the best results in the gym, you need to be considering those things. So another interesting thing that I kind of wanted to discuss. So after we recover, what happens? After we recover, what happens? So after we recover, this idea of adaptation occurs. So we place some stress on our body. We are trying to do all the good recovery tools. And the whole point of all that is to adapt and to get better. Otherwise, what's the point of us doing fitness? So basically, no, when you're thinking, what is adaptation? This happens after the recovery aspect. This does not happen in the gym. That's a really, really big thing I want you to remember. Just because you lifted a weight in the gym doesn't mean you will actually get stronger. You need that recovery aspect. So humans adapt very quickly to a lot of given responses, stress-wise, and we're talking about physical demands in this, right? Since we're looking at improving our fitness capabilities, humans adapt very quickly. Your body adapts to the stress, which is great, but the thing about this is that you're not going to get the same results. You're not going to get the same results. This is why overload and doing progression is very, very important. So after numerous bouts of stress, your body will go through the recovery process, assuming you're doing all those good things that we talked about, like getting good sleep, hydration, protein, carbs, all these things. I have lots of videos on my channel that you can check out that talk about those recovery tools and tips. But after you do those things, your body, it's easier to do, right? You lifted 50 pounds one day, and after your recovery protocol, you notice that, man, 50 pounds is easy, right? Doing curls with whatever weight you're doing, it's easy today. Or maybe you're not as sore. That's another thing that happens with people. They do a novel workout, and they're like, man, I'm feeling really beat up. But after you do that workout or that exercise for a couple weeks, you're probably thinking, oh man, this is not as bad. Not only is it easier, but I'm not as sore. And that's the adaptation. After that recovery, your body's gotten used to it. And that's a great thing because at that point that in some aspect or some form or another, that you have gotten stronger. You have gotten fitter for your own capability level. But this is also why we need a constant change in stimulus. Essentially, the way I want you to think about this is your body is now too efficient at whatever activity you're doing. So if you're thinking about running, for example, and you can now run a 6-minute mile, your body has adapted to the ability to be able to run a 6-minute mile. If you just continually run 6-minute miles, guess what? You're probably never going to run that 5-minute mile because you're never overloading. You've adapted to it, which again is a good thing because you now know that you can handle that. But we need something else. We need a new stimulus, which is where earlier in the podcast when we talked about progression and overload and all those things are all super crucial and important. When we're talking about lifting, let's think about the 50-pound curl, for example, or wherever you're at, whatever you're currently doing. And you're lifting that weight and it becomes easy. Your body is now efficient at that. It's saying, oh, this is a cinch, man. I can do this workout no problem. And that's a great thing because you're stronger, but you've also adapted. So we need to add additional stress and additional workload through overload and progression. So adaptation is great, but we need more. I'll give a really good example of this. I used to work at a senior living community, and one of the ladies that came in, she always liked doing a treadmill. 3 miles per hour of a 20-minute treadmill every single day. That was one of her forms of physical activity. And that's great. I would never steer anyone away from doing that. Actually, that's one of the best hacks if you want to become the fittest version of yourself. Start walking more. 10 to 15 minutes makes a huge difference. Long story short though, she did this every single day. Her body adapted to that. So she actually wasn't getting as much benefit for her overall physical capabilities because she wasn't pushing the boundaries. She wasn't overloading the system. She wasn't trying to get better. And there's something to be said about just maintaining your overall fitness level too. It's not always about getting better. You might get to a point where you're like, I'm okay just being this strong. And that's great. And if that is the case for you, then just roll with it. But don't get it fooled that if you do actually want to get better, you need to apply more overload. You need to stress the system, because without that, there will be no reason for you to adapt. Again, you become so efficient at that given task that it really doesn't matter. So that's adaptation, super, super crucial. It happens after recovery. And probably another big thing to talk about and discuss is this idea of reversibility in fitness. So what is reversibility when we're talking about fitness programming? When you are trying to become the fittest version of yourself, you need to have stress continually added or reapplied to your life. What happens if you don't? This idea of detraining is what happens. So there's a lot of different ways you can detrain. You can lose muscle, you can lose stamina, you may decrease your strength, and that's simply because your body is now becoming inefficient at it. So just like when you adapt, you become really efficient at it, when you don't use a muscle, it loses that inefficiency. It loses the ability to actually have muscle mass, because your body simply says, I don't need this anymore. I don't need this anymore. And I'm going to use the energy elsewhere. I'm going to use it into running other tasks in my body. You're going to lose stamina because you are not applying stress to your heart, your lungs, and cardiovascular system, which ultimately leads you to hopefully recover from it and get better. So without these stresses, and again, it's a balance. We don't want too much stress, but we want enough to elicit a response that we then need to recover from, which we will then adapt to. Just like you can adapt to getting better, you can also kind of adapt in the reverse way and reverse all your fitness gains. So detraining is a real thing. It happens kind of different on different individuals. So some people who are naturally gifted in aerobic capacity, they may be able to take more time off doing running workouts, for example, compared to somebody who's really, really good at doing weightlifting. Myself personally, I'm pretty decent at aerobic activities, but I'll notice that my strength, if I don't work out strength-wise for a week, I lose strength very rapidly. Versus, I just went out for a jog actually last week. First time I went out for a jog in a very long time, and it was like nothing. It's like I picked up where I left off. I was doing like biking and some cardiovascular work, but not the same exercise, and it was easier for me. So the time frame is going to be different. It's going to be different on what your training experience is, and also just kind of what your overall genetics are for that given activity. So it's different for everyone. The really cool thing about detraining though, and reversibility in fitness, is that you will regain a lot of your quote unquote gains quickly. So there are a lot of permanent changes that happen in training. When you lift a weight and build muscle strength, there's actually these little muscle cells called myonuclei in your muscles that you produce more of. And when you lose muscle size, for example, those cells stay there. They get smaller, but they stay there. And when you start retraining again, guess what? You still have all those cells you built, which is why a lot of times people, when they start lifting again, they'll notice that they increase their strength very, very rapidly. So if you think that's pretty neat, go ahead and give the video a like. I think it's great. It's a great reason to start fitness training and start to become the fittest version of yourself today, because some of those changes are permanent. There's also some neurological changes too. So if we think about our central nervous system, if you learn how to do a squat or a bench press or a push-up, anything, running, that's a neurological movement. It takes a large amount of skill and motor pattern to do that. When you do that, your body becomes more efficient at it. And if you detrain or reverse in your fitness level, guess what? The next time you come back to that, your body still remembers it to a small degree. It still remembers how to squat. You won't be as efficient. You won't be quite as good. You'll be a little rusty, if you will, but you will gain back those capabilities very quickly. So way I think about this is I used to still do every now and again. I'll go shoot basketball, and I shoot hoops maybe 2 to 3 times a year now. I actually love it. I should do it more. But the first day, actually the first couple shots, I feel rusty. I'm like, where in the world did my basketball go? But after 10 minutes of shooting, I pretty much almost picked up where I left off of all my shooting capabilities. That neurological component of shooting a basketball is still in my brain because I've trained it a lot from years of exposure. This is the exact same thing to fitness, any sporting principle. So if there's any reason for you to get into fitness and health and start working out, it's that one thing. There are permanent changes that happen when you are doing these things, which is very, very crazy, and a lot of people don't realize. So those are a few of the things to become the fittest version of yourself. Like the video if this helps, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you in the next podcast. Let me know down below in the comments which part of fitness training or of these principles that you're going to work on, and we'll see you next time.